Hi, this is Dr. Cherie, and welcome to my podcast. My guest today is Wayne Miller, and it's going to be a very exciting experience for you to share with me. My guest today that I really want you to experience, listen to really closely, and get to know him because he's a very special person. His name is Wayne Miller, and his beginnings, he started out at GlaxoSmithKline Labs when he was very young in Philadelphia. He did a lot in pharmacology, but his passion was the right and left hemispheres of the brain. Got really into what the brain does and how it functions and why do we have two brains. He also became an investment officer for, I think it was 18 years that he got immersed in that. Worked with the Federal Reserve for several years. The bottom line about Wayne is that he discovers something, his curiosity is piqued, then he immerses himself in it with full absorption. And he then becomes an authority about that field, and then he goes on to the next field. He's really a brilliant man. And now he's focused on gardening, growing broccoli. He started a company called Neura Health, which is one of his passions. And the other thing is indigenous people. So a woman by the name of Paulette Jordan is running for office in Idaho, and he is her chief of staff. Now, if that isn't the most eclectic biographical information that I've ever heard, all I can say is he's a really fascinating person, extremely brilliant. And what we're going to focus on today is what can the individual, that means you, what can you do to mitigate the risk of COVID-19, take responsibility for being healthy, and eliminate or at least minimize the worries in daily life. Please join me in welcoming Wayne Miller to our show. Hi, Wayne.
Hi, Cherie. Well, thank you. I'm not sure how I'm going to live up to that. So, but I very much appreciate the introduction and where to begin. Let me start off by saying I was a scientist. I was a neuroscientist for a while when I was younger, and then I was a finance person and got pretty deep into both arenas. And so, there's a synthesis that goes on when you're deep in a couple of different disciplines, no matter what it would be. And I have found that is really one of the interesting parts of life. That is maybe the most interesting part of life, is because you just begin to see things that you couldn't possibly see if I just had a Ph.D. in one thing or another. COVID-19. Well, let me start with the concept of evolution. Evolution is kind of a synonym for cooperation, because fundamentally my ancestors had to cooperate with the environment in which they found themselves in, or I wouldn't be here. And you could take that to one level deeper, molecularly speaking. The internal molecular environment of my ancestors had to cooperate with the external molecular environment in which they found themselves, or that fundamental basis of cooperation would never have happened. So in the real world, there is a technical term for internal and external molecular cooperation. It's called food. So you could ask the question, what's the likelihood that you could build a healthcare system that was efficient and effective, leave out one of the fundamental tenets of evolution, and think you had something that was useful, or for that matter, science-based, because you've just ignored something about science? So this is setting the stage for COVID-19 conversation. So let me jump to one other thing, which is if you Google something called the right-hand rule, you're going to find out that it's taught in kind of the first week of Engineering 101. And the professor usually will stand at on the stage and do something like this. And I don't know if you can kind of see that, but the idea is it is meant to imply, this mnemonic is meant to imply that where you have a movement of electrical charge, you have a magnetic field that accompanies that movement and travels at a 90-degree angle to it. This is just known engineering principle in the universe. There's some question as to whether or not it operates at the center of black holes, but what's the likelihood given that the brain, the heart, muscles, all cell membranes work on the movement of electrical charge, you could ask the question, what does the magnetic field that accompanies that charge have to do with human homeostasis? Now, you could ask that question, but that question isn't asked or answered in medical school. So, what's the likelihood that you could create a healthcare system, leave out a fundamental principle about how energy and matter interact with one another, and come up with a healthcare system that makes any sense, or one that you could call it science-based? So let's start there. Medicine misses a lot. And one of the things that the COVID-19 phenomenon has created is an astounding amount of noise, but not about those two things that I just mentioned, which are pretty relevant because they're foundational. So there is this notion of germ theory that has us focused on these pathogens as invaders. And the thing about invaders is they invade something. So in that case, the human body is the space that they invade. And oh, by the way, it just happens to be handily the case that whether you think God, we are made in God's image and therefore we are what we are, or evolution was really the phenomenon, whatever those processes you think were the start of the etiology of all this, you have to conclude that we were given this spectacular defense called our immune system. And where on this planet have you heard a single public health official go, you know, if your immune system is boosted as best you can, I can't guarantee you you won't get COVID or you won't even get sick. But you're using your innate mechanism by design to increase your chances of it not simply being a problem. So I'm sorry?
It makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's really logical, except that it's not on CNN or anything else, and it's not going to be. So one way to decrease the risk or fear of COVID-19 is to really there's a certain recognition that goes on that what we think of as science, what passes for the gold standard of science, simply is the wrong tool, because if it resulted in the kind of thing that we refer to as healthcare and left out all those important pieces of the puzzle, they are surely missing something.
Absolutely.
So in the United States, 90% of all the money spent on healthcare is spent on chronic care, providing chronic care services. Chronic care is chronic because whatever they do doesn't fix it. So you know, instead of the physician community thinking, well, that sounds like evidence, we don't know what we're doing. they don't think of it like that. They just think of it as it's revenue in the door. People are complicated. Maybe one day we'll figure it out. Well, it turns out that there's a lot of folks that have chipped away at this, and there's a lot that can be figured out once you include all the tools in your toolbox, like the notion about evolution, and you can't violate fundamental principles. The notion of the right-hand rule and magnetic fields have something to do with it. And so with regards to evolution and the notion of this molecular bridge called food, it turns out that nourishment and nutrition is a bit of a complicated topic for a bunch of reasons. One of those reasons is that we have food that we are raised in. We have environments we are raised in. They all impact our immune system. They impact the functioning of our physiology. And so to some extent, while people often say, oh, my father had that, my grandfather had that, the truth is genetic blueprints are there for the manufacture of proteins. That's what genes do. They tell the body to manufacture proteins. However, one gene might tell the body to manufacture as many as 20,000 different proteins. And you could ask the question, well, how does the body know which one to produce? And the answer is the signal comes from some responsiveness that the body accumulates inside that has the effect of telling the genes to establish a configuration. The process is really called epigenetics, which is the expression of genes. And the idea is that the mechanism is built to be responsive to our outside environment, because that's adaptation. That is the principle of evolution in action. So I come from a family, and this is all preamble to COVID. I come from a family in which my father and uncle and brothers, all diabetic, heart disease, kidney disease, full-blown metabolic syndrome. And I'm 64 and I've got none of that going on, because I'm very conscious of the nutritional biochemistry that instead turning on those genes that lead to metabolic syndrome, it turns on other genes that allow me to remain healthy. So it turns out food has an astounding amount to do with being healthy. By the way, so does not eating food. So a lot of people know about intermittent fasting, the idea that, okay, fine, don't eat breakfast. You can start eating a meal like in the middle of the afternoon and have a little meal or a big meal then and a small meal in the evening. And it turns out, and you can fast for 3 or 4 days. And fasting has been known for millennia as a healthy thing to do. It turns out that the cells in our body have a kind of a mechanism, also as an expression of evolutionary pressures, where we didn't eat 3 square meals a day 10,000 or 100,000 years ago. It's not the way it worked. You ate when you had food, and you didn't eat until you got the food.
Pretty basic.
Pretty basic. So your cells learn to have this mechanism called, hey, guess what? We got no food now. Kind of go into suspended animation. It turns out this is really important because they slow down all energy production in those cells. And the cells, they don't really go to sleep, but they kind of go a bit dormant. Why that's relevant is because should somebody end up with cancer, when you fast before getting chemotherapy, you need much less chemotherapy, because the cells that are sort of asleep, if you will, or dormant, are the healthy cells, and the cancer cells are still, give me energy, give me energy, give me energy. And so they tend to soak up more of the chemotherapeutic agent, should you choose to do that kind of patient care. And so fasting can be very beneficial.
Okay.
This is completely different than what was told to cancer patients 20 years ago.
Let me just jump in for a second, because you're giving us a lot of really good information, but I'm talking to you, our listeners and viewers. Number one, this is a hot tip from Wayne Miller. Number one, if you have cancer and you're getting chemotherapy, before your next treatment, fast. Now, the question is, fast for a day, fast for 2 days, fast for a week. That's the question. What do you think, Wayne? What's the best way?
Well, good question. And I think it probably really depends on a whole host of factors. So it's not a question I can really easily answer, but I can say that wherever you're getting your chemotherapy from, make sure that a nutritionist is included in the team that you are seeing in terms of patient care.
Right.
And I say that for 2 reasons. One, they're going to know enough about your case and about the circumstances and, what drugs you've been on, what other comorbidities might be involved, what kind of support you have, because those are all really relevant factors when it comes to cancer. When my wife had breast cancer, I think that Cherie, I had mentioned that to you before. It's many years ago now. When the oncologist sat down with us, she said, cancer is a very individualized disease. So I didn't think we'd be talking about cancer per se. I want to get back to COVID-19, but it is a true statement. And by the way, I think every disease is pretty individualized for a bunch of different reasons.
Yeah.
Some of which have to do with, what are called adverse childhood events, the kind of traumas one goes through as a child that literally get embedded in how you interact with the world. Another is the kind of food you ate in sort of in years 0 through 5. Another was, wow, were you born in a natural childbirth from the vaginal canal, or were you C-section? Because of course we now know, this would have sounded crazy years ago, but we now know that the bacterial colonization of the vaginal canal is perfect. Of course it is, for stimulating the development of the immune system in the infant that's about to pop out into the world. And so when someone is born by C-section, they don't get that bacterial colonization, they get something else. And so you find that people with C-sections, it turns out are, have a greater incidence of ADD, ADHD, and all kinds of different things. And so you will find some some OBGYNs, particularly the female OBGYNs, and some midwives now suggesting if you must have a C-section, and I get it, there are times something like that must happen, make sure you have a long Q-tip, wipe it in the vaginal canal, and make sure you smear that all over the baby's face
Oh, yeah.
so that they can be inoculated with the bacteria designed by God or evolution to stimulate that baby's development.
Okay, so that's the second hot tip that you've given us now to anyone who is about to be able to give birth to a child. And there are many of our listeners who are pregnant at this moment. So it's
Yeah.
called Note to Self. Talk to the gynecologist, OBGYN, the person who's going to be doing the delivery, whether it's a midwife or whoever. Talk to them and make certain, if you have to go the route of a C-section, that you do the due diligence of having that bacterial colonization smeared on the baby's face. That's the second really important point.
Yes. So, and again, 15 years ago, that would have been a bit crazy talk, but it's not so much anymore. It doesn't mean everybody knows about it. But so COVID-19, I started to talk about, an invader has to have something to invade, and it's the body. And I got to the part about the immune system. So when you study the immune system, you're sort of awestruck. It's a little bit like the picture behind you. It's just stunning for the nature of what we are. And our immune system has lots of components to it. So it's not like a mechanism of a bunch of wheels turning like cogs in a large mechanism. It's not like that. There are multiple feedback loops, and there's a lot of things you can do to boost your immune system. And some of this, even with regards to COVID, is already documented. So the notion of taking supplemental vitamin D3,
Okay, so you froze a little bit just then. You said D3, supplement D3.
D3
In,
as in
in what,
David 3.
in what quantities?
So usually they're sold in what's called IUs, international units.
Yeah.
And, vitamins is one of the things about vitamins is it really doesn't matter. I mean, the relevant part is not how much you take. Yeah, there you go. It is how much you absorb. So
Yeah.
people can have absorption issues with various vitamins, D3 being one of them. So, and then there's so that could be a reflection of their own body. It could be a reflection of the level of stomach acids they have. It could be a reflection of, candida that is perhaps in their small or large intestine. It can be, there's a lot of things that can impact absorption of nutrients in general, vitamins specifically. If, so to speak, conventionally trained physician, they'll tell you that as long as you're above 20 nanograms per milliliter, you're fine. If you talk to someone who practices integrated medicine or even functional medicine, they're kind of first cousins of one another, so we'll leave it at that for the moment. They'll usually tell you to get your blood serum levels above 50 and 50 to 85. And there's an astounding amount of data on vitamin D3. It upregulates almost a tenth of the genome. It's not really a vitamin, it's more like a hormone. Very relevant for health and maintaining health,
Well,
and directly related.
This one says 4,000 IUs. Is that little or a lot, or should take more?
I take, during the winter, I'll take 10,000 units a day. Now I live in Seattle. So in Seattle, the further north you go from the equator, you have the sun rising at a tangent to the atmosphere, which means that for the sun rays to get through the atmosphere, they've got to travel a longer distance. The sort of UVB rays that create vitamin D in the skin, they get absorbed by clouds, by rain, by all kinds of things. So this is an interesting sort of introduction to the notion of you can't study vitamins the way that you do a drug made in a laboratory.
Right.
And this is a very relevant phenomenon. Wasn't as obvious to me when I was in pharmacology as it has become as I've moved more into natural medicines. But the body, because food has been such a relevant phenomenon in our development as a species, your body has an astounding number of mechanisms to deal with the nutrients that you need. So you could have an urge to go eat something. And sometimes that's like, wow, I want to go have some seaweed. So your body might be telling you that you're craving iodine. There's things like, and we all have that experience in one way or another. And it turns out that because there's all these feedback mechanisms and feedback loops that serve to kind of calibrate the body's absorption and use of nutrients, all of that is different from what happens when you put a molecule that's alien to the body into the body and observe its reactions, because that's a lot more like a sledgehammer. So when your body has a mechanism to deal with something, it sort of knows what to do. It's already built in. You don't have to worry about it much. When there's an alien molecule, they often talk about side effects. But from a pharmacologic point of view, there's really no such thing as a side effect. They are all primary biochemical effects. We call them side effects because you don't want them. Too bad. That's what they give you.
Package.
So side effects is kind of a way of being able to move people's thinking away from, well, this is an alien molecule you're using. Yeah. And of course, the entire industry is built on alien molecules because by definition, that's how you get a patent. You can't patent a natural substance. So we live in a world in which alien molecules are at the basis of what we think is one of the two primary tools in the healthcare toolbox, which is kind of dumb when you think about it, considering how long evolution's been a phenomenon and that we have so many mechanisms inside the body to deal with nutrients. And so D3 is one. Yes. Vitamin C.
How many? How many?
How many what?
How many? Okay, so I have vitamin C, that's B. This is C, and it says it's 1,000. You see that?
So yes, I can see 1,000 milligrams. So
that's 1 gram. Take with the risk of diarrhea if you take, 10,000.
Yeah, if you take it all at once, you'll end up with diarrhea.
Yeah, for sure. So what's safe?
Yeah. So it's a little bit like everything else. I mean, for people with stage 3 of kidney disease, one must be careful. So vitamin C is broken down readily by stomach acids. So when you take the kind of vitamin C that you just showed, it's not that much actually gets in and gets absorbed.
Yeah.
So the vitamin C that I take is called liposomal vitamin C, which really means that it's in a powder wrapped in usually safflower oil. And the idea is the oils protect the vitamin C in its passage through the stomach, so less of it is broken down. There's kind of a rule of thumb, and I don't even remember where it came from, that 1 gram of liposomal vitamin C is equivalent absorption-wise to 4 grams of the vitamin C that you just showed me. So if you take 2 grams of liposomal vitamin C, and it costs more to manufacture and all that, but 2 grams is equivalent to 8 grams of vitamin C a day. Now you're getting close to what Linus Pauling talked about in terms of daily absorption. So my wife and I, when we first found out about COVID, and there is a website called orthomolecularmedicine.com. It's really a bunch of people who studied with Linus Pauling over many decades ago and are huge proponents of using vitamin C to maintain health. Vitamin C is used by many integrated medicine docs dealing with various types of pathogenic infections, as well as cancer, as well as COVID-19. And so when we first found out that there was a thing called COVID-19, my wife and I loaded up on liposomal vitamin C and was taking it day in and day out. And usually in the winters, we don't really get sick. Like if a flu comes around, I might feel bad for an hour or two, but nothing takes me out for like a couple of days.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned colloidal silver, didn't you, when we talked?
I did. So that's colloidal silver is, so it comes in different forms. Usually there's some sort of nanotechnology it's very interesting, that's been applied to the silver to increase its surface area. And the version of that I take is 10 parts per million. Mind you, no one should just go start doing this stuff without talking to someone,
Absolutely.
about whatever circumstances they have, right? I mean,
Work with the
no one
authorities,
should just,
their healthcare
yeah.
provider, their nutritionist, etc. But if they're a fairly normal walking around person, I know there are a few of those and they're few and far between these days, but I'm just talking about like me. For instance, since I live in Thailand, it's probably not possible for me to get liposomal C. Not possible to have it shipped here, and if it were, it would be um, apprehended, and then
Yeah.
I would be charged probably quadruple the price to be able to get it back. So it's not an option for me to get that as long as I'm here in
Yeah.
Thailand. So I'm just talking about the person somewhere in the world who's listening and watching us today, who can maybe gain access to something, whether it's D3 or it's vitamin C or it's colloidal silver, whatever, so that they can do some of the great things that you're suggesting.
So I understand what you're saying, and I'm mentioning all these things not because I read about them in some book, because this is what I do for myself and my
Sure.
family. So that's why. And we've been doing this for years. So the colloidal silver is interesting because about 5 years ago I had bacterial pneumonia for the third time, I might add. And the first time I had it was back in the 90s. And, I was a mountaineer. I was in pretty good shape. But boy, that thing kicked my behind. And I remember the doctor telling me, once you get this, you can get it again and again. And I never really thought much about that. 5 years ago, since I've been doing the work that I've been doing, I started to think, what does that actually mean? So I've kind of figured out that means the bacteria must still be deep in my lungs. That's how you would get it. And antibiotics don't get deep into the lungs because for most of us, we barely even use the deep part of our lungs. And so I realized I needed to find a way to get something into my lungs to kill the bacteria. I found an ultrasonic nebulizer from a company in Germany. A nebulizer is something that, you put a liquid in the chamber and it sprays out a mist. And in this case, the mist was 0.3 microns. The kind of $30 nebulizer you buy on Amazon is probably spits out a mist that's 5 microns. So it's a larger mist. I wanted something smaller to get deep into my lungs. So my bacterial pneumonia was diagnosed by a physician. I treated myself 2 times a day for 2 days. So 4 total treatments. Aside from buying the nebulizer, probably was about 35 cents.
Ah,
And my pneumonia was gone.
yeah,
So now here's the relevant part to that story.
it sounds like miracles. And I'm sure some people listening to this are going to think either you're a brilliant scientist who's making extraordinary miracles happen for absolutely no money, or you might be on the verge of insanity. One of the two, because it's so far from people's reality.
Well, if you don't know much about nutrition and biophysics and your reality is built on conventional medicine, it probably is pretty far from your reality.
There you go.
So here's why what I just described is important. When you go back into history and ask the question, hey, what did people die of during 1918 when that pandemic was going on? It's called the Spanish flu, but it really wasn't about Spain. And the answer is, when you look at it, and this data is pretty solid as far as I can tell, they didn't die from the virus. And the virus would get you sick. But when you had a viral pneumonia and a bacterial pneumonia coincident with it, it's as though the 2 forms of pneumonia overwhelmed the system and you would die. So people actually died by having the viral pneumonia and the bacterial pneumonia at the same time.
How awful.
So my thought has been, well, what if you got rid of the bacterial pneumonia by doing this? There's no guarantee that COVID-19,
Right.
more virulent round 2 would work that way. But if it does,
Yeah.
I think that this is what I'm planning on doing for myself and my family.
Okay, so right now, let me just summarize for a second. We've got vitamin D, we've got vitamin C, then we have colloidal silver, and getting a nebulizer so that you can get it deep into your lungs. Is that, am I on track so far?
Yes, yes,
Okay. Are there other things that you would do for yourself and your family and people that you care about?
yes. So there's actually a bunch of other things that we do because, and I can't, most of these things are not very expensive, right? A bottle of D3 is probably $8, at least in the States.
Okay.
Um, a liter of colloidal silver is about $30. So it's not that I'm cheap per se. It is that I'm looking for simple solutions for which there's some kind of data somewhere that says, one, it's unlikely to hurt me, and two, it's likely to work. Those are kind of the criteria that I look at.
Well, I think that's simple and brilliant at the same time. And my question to you is, so we have in our condo in Bangkok, we have a bunch of colloidal silver that we didn't bring with us, but when we go back to Bangkok, we will get it. Now, the question is, if you, can you take too much of it? Can you overdose on colloidal silver?
Well, you can, and every once in a while you see someone who has turned blue, but that's from using something that's, I don't know, 1,000 or 2,000 parts per million. I mean, this is an extraordinary level of silver that you're putting into your body. First off, it's completely unnecessary in terms of the therapeutic effect. Again, the stuff that I use is 10 parts per million.
Okay.
And and I've used it for years. I've drank it. If when we traveled down to Mexico and got some sort of bug and had, severe intestinal distress, I'll call it, to be, because it's a family show, then I used, colloidal silver.
Okay.
Um, there's another thing, zinc.
Zinc.
So, so zinc is a very interesting thing. Zinc is found in the myelin cells, the fat cells that wrap around neurons in the brain. These are the cells that really give neuronal communication their character. And so zinc is found in those cells and in the myelin cells. And the myelin sheath of neurons, it turns out, is the greater, it uses oxygen more than any other part of the brain, more than the neurons themselves. The myelin does. So this is very interesting because zinc has been known to be able to be effective in killing various viruses just at the moment when you start to go, you know what, I don't feel right.
Mm.
I will take, my wife will take 18 milligrams of zinc.
18.
And we do that sort of 2 or 3 times a day for 2 or 3 days. And it works like a charm.
Great. That's fabulous. All right. So I'm just
And
going to repeat that.
zinc is also
But
inexpensive.
yeah,
So there's, yeah.
zinc 2 to 3 times per day will knock out a virus out of your system. Now, what about B vitamins? Because I hear a lot about B vitamins being important for us in reducing stress and being able to regulate our system. And I think people are under an incredible amount of stress these days with the uncertainties of the future, whether it's COVID and what it's going to do, or whether it's the economy, or whether it's this election that we're encountering in November, which is terrifying to a lot of us as well. What do you have to say about B vitamins?
Well, they are essential. It's interesting. Almost all B vitamins are water soluble. There's one type that is fat soluble called benfotiamine. It used to be on patent years ago. It's used to help regulate the A1C levels in diabetics because it's been known to reduce A1C. So it's really inexpensive. Um, Niacin is another B vitamin. Niacin was researched by a MD who was a psychiatrist, I think, in the University of Edmonton, I want to say. Might be Calgary. I might have those mixed up. Years ago, Hoffman, Dr. Hoffman, I think was his name. And he took long-term schizophrenics and gave them increasing doses of nicotinamide version of niacin. A lot of people know the kind that don't cause a flush, but he gave them the kind that does cause a flush. And nicotinamide is not related to nicotine. It's just the same root word, but it's not related. And he got people up to significant dosages and was able to completely eliminate schizophrenia in half of his patients.
That's amazing.
So B vitamins, when people have kidney issues, they are often deficient in B6. How do I know that? For many years, I had kidney stones. When I started taking B6 and the hydrangea root, or phosphorus in pumpkin seed oil, my kidney stones all went away. They've never come back. So this is an interesting phenomenon. Usually when you have a kidney stone, they'll tell you, well, you're eating too many brassicas, too many, broccoli and green things, and you got to cut out the oxalates. And it turns out, that all made perfect sense to me, but it turns out that in a system in which there's a multitude of complex variants operating, calcium and phosphorus are part of a certain kind of balance.
Mm-hmm.
So if the body is trying to get rid of calcium, that could, in theory, mean you have an excess of calcium, or it could mean you have a deficiency in phosphorus. It just looks like an excess of calcium. And so when I added phosphorus via Styrian pumpkin seed oil into my diet,
Yes.
my kidney stones went away and have never come back.
Amazing. Have you written a book about this yet?
No. My work, so some of my work came to be what it was because I was retained by the United States Air Force Medical Service. I was a consultant to the Surgeon General of the Air Force, and met with 5 of the last 6 Surgeon Generals of the Air Force to talk about integrative medicine, which all of this nutritional stuff kind of falls under. And eventually the Air Force issued a contract on which I was the prime technical lead on how do you document this stuff anyway? If it doesn't work the same as, alien molecules, pharmacology, what I used to do, then how do you document it? And that's really the heart of my work, is the informatics part of this, because the question became, if you were going to really reinvent healthcare, then it would be good to reinvent it on some core principle. And that core principle, in my mind, became, what's the least expensive thing you could do that's most effective? So it's not, you don't need a PhD to go, well, that makes sense.
Right.
It is not what medicine does now. Medicine in the United States, and I think most of the rest of the world, does not work that way.
Right.
And
so
that became the journey.
Totally, is there anything else that you can recommend to our viewers that they might do to boost their immune systems? Because I think a lot of people are just very confused about, whether something is good for you or not good for you, whether it's a tomato or whether it's a nightshade, or, taking vitamin C or not. I mean, I can see your book being, I healed myself, you can too. And it's not about a prescriptive device, but really a curiosity approach to looking deeper under the surface or under the hood of the whole body, healthcare, immune system, and being able to connect the dots, which you've done brilliantly. Is there anything else that you want to suggest to our viewers that they can do by themselves and doing the research? Because if they do have kidney disease, or if they have cancer or whatever, they shouldn't just do anything. They should really check with the powers that be. But is there anything else that you can recommend at this moment?
Yeah, so there's something very fundamental. And I really have to tell you, I came about it through raising my own food. I think I told you this story the other day. We're growing broccoli in a part of my garden, and my wife was growing it in another part, and I remineralized the soils. I used something called humic acid. Yeah, the fulvic acid is the part that humans have. Humic acid is the part that's the soil amendment. So fulvic acid, Fulvic, is really part of humate, but the part of the story that's relevant is I put minerals back into the soil because I live in Seattle. There's 55 inches of rain every year. Minerals get washed out of the soil. So if you don't put them back in, they don't sort of magically come there. And so my broccoli was bigger and better and no aphids than my wife's broccoli. And that got me to thinking, do humans have to be remineralized?
That's right.
And it turns out they do.
So
Because
does
if you
fulvic
eat
acid
food,
do that then for humans? Is that the remineralization?
fulvic acid is the liquid that contains usually 70, 72 minerals, something like that. And we're all demineralized because we all eat food that has long since been in which the minerals have long since gone. They've washed away. They've been in the food that was grown in that space 50 years ago. And unless you put the minerals back in, they're not there.
In what quantity fulvic acid?
So my wife and I eat pretty well, as you might imagine, and we'll still take an ounce or two of the bottle every week,
Okay,
just to sort of top off the system,
got it.
so to speak. And
What?
it costs, I think a gallon is like $120 in the US. So we're really talking about $120 a year.
Got it.
And here's the thing, half of all enzymes in the body, enzymes are the proteins that create some activity. They're not just a structural phenomenon, they are a metabolic phenomenon. Half of them require a mineral in the middle of their three-dimensional configuration. And if you don't have them, you're not going to have enough enzymes to do what the body needs to do. So rule number one in health, remineralize and go from there, because that alone should help build the immune system, should help with cognition, it should help with kidney function.
Okay, so I'm going to summarize for a second here. I'm going to go back to D3. You're talking about 10,000 IUs a day. And then C depends on your situation and your condition, but C is a good thing, especially if you can get the kind that you can absorb as opposed to the kind that you just eliminate in visits to the health, what do you call it, the restroom.
Right.
Colloidal silver, you say 10 parts per million. And zinc, 18 mil, 2 to 3 times per day. B's, you said B's are good, especially B6, which wards off kidney stones, and niacin, the flesh kind. B6 is also in pumpkin seeds, calcium and phosphorus, fulvic acid, 1 to 2 ounces per week. Anything else to add to the list so that people can have a shopping list to take away from our show?
Well, I mean, I can keep going on and on. Vitamin A.
Okay.
So vitamin A is also a key ingredient in boosting the immune system. And let me say this, a lot of people have a compromised immune systems because of the food that they eat. One of the great culprits is gluten. Another culprit is glyphosate, the chemical ingredient in Roundup. Glyphosate is actually a derivative of lysine and amino acid. It was originally filed the patent as an antibiotic. And the lining of the gut, which is one cell layer thick, you should think of it as like a brick wall, where that brick wall, the mortar between the bricks is really solid and strong. But if you have a gluten sensitivity, which a lot of people do,
I do.
2 to 3% of the population may be celiac, but probably 40% have a sensitivity. And then glyphosate is additive to that. The impact on the mortar of the brick wall of the lining of the intestine is to loosen it. And that creates sort of holes, literally, where particles of food and pathogens can get in and through into the blood supply that are then carried to the rest of the body. This is one cause of the development of autoimmune disease.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
So there are things you can take. There's to ameliorate and to close up those holes. Because if you don't get your lining closed again, you're always going to have what's known as a leaky gut. And
so how much vitamin A? You didn't listen. How much? What quantity? Generally speaking.
There's a good question. So, I think of it only as a dropper, one drop of the dropper full. And I think a dropper full is 10,000 international units.
Okay.
So one drop is probably an eighth of that. And I'll take that, we eat carrots, yes, but I'll take that once a week. Just a drop.
Just once a week, 10,000.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a fraction of that, and I don't remember now the dropper full off the top of my head. So I think it's about 2,000 units um, off the top of my head. The truth is I don't remember as we sit here and
It's
speak.
okay, you're forgiven. You do not have to
Yeah,
be an encyclopedia of all subjects at this moment in
all
time.
things.
You have enough information that you could dispose that would fill hundreds of these podcasts. I'm absolutely convinced of that. So you're forgiven about vitamin A. Now, is there anything else on the shopping list?
Well, so there's another thing that I will do frequently, which is something called liposomal colostrum. So colostrum, of course, is the first liquid that comes out of a female mammalian's breast. It is the protein and immunoglobulins that literally, again, start the development of the baby's immune system when a baby starts suckling off of a mother's breast. And there are manufacturers of this that do it responsibly and in terms of their humane treatment of the cows and all that. And people I know who do this all the time, they would tell you they just never get sick. So I keep several pounds of this stuff on hand at all times. I kind of cheat. I put in some dark cocoa and a little bit of honey because otherwise it just tastes like milk, and I don't really drink milk.
Yeah.
Um, there was one other thing I was going to mention. Now I don't remember what it was.
Okay. So
Yeah.
can they find colostrum on the internet or in their local nutritional?
Yeah, there's one company that I use. I'm not usually in the, I don't usually give out names of companies, but this is the best product that I know of it. I don't mind saying it. It's something called Sovereign Labs.
Okay.
Sovereign Labs. It's made here. I think it's made in like near San Diego or something. I don't.
Okay.
Maybe it's New Mexico, Arizona.
It's always good to know a company that has absorbable materials because
Yeah.
there's such competition in the market and labels and names and this is the best, that's the best. It's really good to hear from somebody who's as thoroughly researched as you are about a company that you would stand behind. So our
Well,
time is flying by. Is there anything else to add to the list before this?
so I should say, just because I thought I was going to get to more things, I don't sell anything. So I've got no interest in any economic thing at all, nor health doesn't sell anything. We really deal with informatics. And I want to sort of finish my COVID talk by saying worry itself is problematic. And
Say more.
worry is a habit.
Okay, so let me just tell you, I had a session the other day with a young man in Vietnam, and he was talking about his mother and that she worries about absolutely everything. And so I said, well, it sounds like either it's an addiction for her or that it's a way of expressing and sharing her love for the people that she cares about. He said, well, it's an Asian thing. If you don't worry about someone, it means you don't love them. And I said, so would you, because he's one of my students, and I said, would you be willing to have a conversation with her about whether she's addicted or if this is an expression of love or if she would be willing to worry less. And so I wanted to ask you about this because my students will be watching this as well. And I really want them to hear your words about worry.
Um, so I often will tell people worry is what we learn to do um, in to sort of subconsciously allow ourselves to feel like we're being responsible without being responsible.
Oh, that's heavy.
And so it is a habit. It's something we learn, and it's interesting because when you give up worry, because worry is not about the present, right? There's no be here now with worry.
That was the future.
It's in that sense, it's really utterly a dysfunctional habit, and it does take a while to break it, like all habits that are dysfunctional. Um, but it worry degrades the immune system, and it degrades the capacity for you to use the executive functions buried in your frontal lobes to be able to make high quality decisions, because worry keeps the brain circuitry that's sort of in the midbrain activated as opposed to your forebrain activated. So you're literally inhibiting yourself from being able to exercise the greatest capacity that you have.
Amazing. Amazing. Huh. So if you worry, you're sabotaging your system
Yes,
from optimum
absolutely.
performance.
And this is why people will focus in on, things like Tai Chi or Qigong or meditation because it's a way of, it's not battling the worry, it's just moving into a different space.
Yeah, a different vibration altogether.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Um, Gosh, this has been so fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you all day long, and it would just be so stimulating and interesting and fascinating that we could cover a myriad of different topics. And I want our listeners to know how to get a hold of you, how to reach you, if you want them to, because I think they might have questions or comments or asking for advice or where to, how to, etc. So will you let us know how to get a hold of you the best way?
Yeah, my email is wayne.miller at Nura, N-U-R-A, health, all one word, N like Norman, Utah, Rudolph, Apple, norahealth.com. That's the easiest way to, and it's probably good to put in the subject line, heard you on Cherie Scott's program, so then I'll know how to respond and who to respond to. I must tell you, you just have to give me some time to be responsive because I
Sure.
already have 8,000 unopened emails that I'm just working my way through, and another couple thousand come in, and so it takes. It's where I am.
I understand. I don't envy you,
Yeah.
but that's great. And I really, really appreciate that. And I know that your big passion right now in your life is to transform the healthcare system in the United States of America so that it's functional, number one, affordable, number two, and does its job, which is to keep people healthy, happy, and alive, and which it's not doing right now at all. And so I just want to tell you that I really, really appreciate the work that you're doing. You're doing it for all of us, and you really are a hero to our healthcare system. And I hope that you're going to get the chance to be able to make that incredible breakthrough with a dysfunctional system that we have. And thank you for being on my podcast. And I hope you'll be on once again when you get through those 9,000 emails. And maybe later on, we'll have another moment together. Thank you, Wayne, for being on with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Cherie. Much appreciated. And you have a good evening.
Right. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. And once again, tune in to Dr. Cherie's podcast. I'd love to be able to give you information from the people that I think you need to hear. I will only select the people that I think are ethical, honest, um, straightforward, and will give you the straight shot on everything you need to know about the times in which we live. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for trusting me. And we'll see you soon. Bye.